Okay, I think that worked. Well, now if I could just advance my slides, I'd be all set. There we go. Can we all still see it? Okay, excellent. Okay, so we're going to talk about beginning and macro and close-up photography tonight. So what is it? What is macro and close-up photography? It's making small items seem and appear larger than life. It brings you closer into a subject. It can reveal details you may miss with your naked eye. Personally, for me, I like seeing some amazing detail. I've always loved to see detail of things. And of course, knowing me, you guys, I like to use a lot of creativity.
Shirley, can I interrupt for a minute?
You sure can.
Am I the only one that's seeing still the little message right in the center that says this meeting is being recorded? Does anybody else see that message in the middle of their screen?
I saw
You
it
have to
for a
click on
moment,
that,
but once I
say
clicked
it's
on got
okay.
it, then it went away.
Yeah, you have to acknowledge it, Karen.
Oh, I'm supposed to acknowledge it. Yeah. Thank you. Did it.
Okay. So our discussion topics for tonight is we're going to dip your toes into the macro close-up world. I'm going to explain some ways to accomplish that or for you to try out. And we're going to talk about some very basic beginning settings. We're also going to talk about some basic concepts and beginning concepts that you'll need to know. And I'll provide lots of examples and also a few things that are more beyond basic, but not expert. And remember, again, I'm not an expert on this. I just like to shoot macro. What I'm not going to talk about, I'm not going to talk about cameras. I'm not going to talk about choosing other equipment such as tripods or lenses. And I'm not talking about anything with flash. Most of this stuff in the house, I do in my house with no fancy equipment. Okay, but there are some needs for equipment. You got to have a camera. Use the one you have. Tripod helps. A manual release if you have that. That's a nice to have. Lenses. Extension tubes. We'll talk more about those. Some diffusers and lights. They're nice to have too. But now things that you may want to know about and be comfortable with is exposure triangle. Okay, or shooting off of program or automatic modes. You want to understand depth of field. You want to understand a little bit about manual focus. You may, if you don't have a release, you may want to learn how to use a mirror up setting if you have a DSLR or a timer delay. And you're going to need some post-processing software. And remember, just like any other type of photography, that power is in the software. For the software skills, okay. Annette, could you please mute yourself?
What? I don't know, it's just making this noise.
Please mute yourself.
I'm unmuted. Okay, mute.
Okay, I got it taken care of.
Okay.
Okay, so back to what you need to know on the post-processing software. Basic skills, focus stacking. Ooh, that might touch into some other software. And I have found that layers and adding of textures in Photoshop really can boost your creativity for macro photography. Okay, we've all seen the exposure triangle, depth of field, motion, the noise, the ISO settings. We've all learned how to adjust some of that stuff. And if you haven't, it's always good to practice it and try to understand the differences. But for the key to macro photography, depth of field is the most important. So for example, with an f stop of 1.4, you see that you have a very tiny, tiny piece of range that you can actually see what's in focus. 5.6, it gives you a little bit big, deeper depth of field. And then if you went to an F22, you have a lot of depth of field. Okay, so there's various depth of field calculators out there available for smartphones. Just search in your app store for a free one. And that'll help you get a little bit more comfortable with your camera, your lenses, and dealing with what the aperture size should look like and shallower depths of field. It's also related to the subject distance and the focal length of your lens. So just for example, I have a Nikon D800. I have an 85mm macro lens. So I went out to my depth of field calculator and I selected some f-stops. I said, I'm going to be 12 inches from my subject. I'm going to get in there nice and close. And then in the near limit and the far limit, it gives you where things are going to be in focus. But the total depth of field, you can see if I'm at 1.4 for my f-stop, it's pretty tiny of what's going to be in focus. And then as you go up in f-stops, you can see that when you get up to like f22, you're talking a good ½ an inch. And that may be enough to do what you have in mind with what you want to do. So if you haven't played with depth of field, here's an experiment you can do or a little exercise at home. I'm not going to go through each of these steps, but it's a way for you to begin to understand depth of field. This is what the exercise would look like, you and your camera, 3 cans on a table, and the depth of field of exercise looking down on it. So you've got your camera, you're 2 feet from your first subject. You can lay a ruler out, and then you set your other subjects at the second spot and the third spot, all within about 3 feet of each other. So if we did this, and we've done this experiment, this is an f1.4. ISO is auto, 1/80th of a second. That's why you need that tripod. And you can see there that it's a very, very small part from 12 to 13 that even sort of looks to be in focus. F5.6, more comes into focus. You can see the holiday Coca-Cola can. F8, even more. Ooh, there's a can down in the back now you can start seeing. And then finally, if you're up at F16, you can see pretty much all 3 cans, even though the back can is still a little bit not as crisp as you may want it to be. But that helps you see the depth of field and what the possibilities are when you're dealing with these f-stops at different settings and what you may want to be able to see in your macro photography. One point, this took me an awful long time to figure out or get my head around, is you need to make sure of what you want to be in focus with your camera pretty much needs to be parallel to the lens. Because when you're dealing with a ½ an inch or a 0.3 inch of a depth of field, any slight off of parallel isn't going to allow it to all be in focus. Thus the miracle of focus stacking. But in the beginning, when you're first starting out, keep in mind that your lens and your objects sort of need to be parallel to each other to get something in focus. Camera settings. Find your camera manual online or ask Google or ask Alexa. Most everything is online now. Learn about manual focus. Learn how to set your camera up for bracketing, 3 to 5 shots of various exposures. Learn if you have a mirror up setting or a time delay. That's good on a tripod. Learn how to use live view if you have it. And if you're going to shoot macro handheld, you need to learn and practice to hold that camera steady, steady, steady. And I do shoot macro handheld now and then when I'm walking around. Okay, post-processing software, again, anything that you're comfortable using with. I personally use Lightroom Classic. I use some Photoshop. I use some DxO collection and a little bit of Luminar, but not a lot. And then sometimes I get some artsy softwares or plugins to play with. You can try the free trials and then it goes away. You get all excited about it and you play with it for 30 days and then it's like, I'm done with that now. But remember, the power is in the software. Okay, how do you accomplish macro? There's various ways to accomplish this depending on your budget, your patience, and how much time you want to take. There's something called a reversing ring. There's macro bellows or focus rails, telephoto lenses. Ooh, we might have already those in our kit, right? Extension tubes, and then macro lenses, which are specifically made to shoot macro photography. Okay, I didn't try the reversing rings. It's the cheapest way to try macro. Apparently your lens is attached to the body in reverse. But with the reversing rings, you lose all automatic adjustments. You lose all those electronic connections, no focus, no f-stop adjustment. And from what I've read, and this is all just from reading, it's best with fixed focal length lenses, your prime lenses. But like I said, I didn't try this because I don't have one and I didn't order one. And actually, I'll tell you, it scared me a little bit thinking about reversing my lenses on my camera. That just seemed like an unnatural thing. And I couldn't get around that in my head. Okay, macro bellows or focus rails. This is what they look like. I did not try it. They're not portable. You're not going to go hiking with one of these. They're very prone to vibration. And I did try these many years ago at a macro seminar, which was being held on a mezzanine of a manufacturing facility that was not in operation at the time. And we had a lot of even though we were the only people in the building, we were on that mezzanine level, there was enough vibration that it was really quite difficult to get things to lock in. We were surprised. We just somebody had them there. We tried them, played with them, and it was just a little too much vibration and a lot of patience to get anything in sort of semblance of decent fashion. Telephoto lenses. We've all probably got those. Use them for your macro work. Tripod's very useful. Stand about 2 feet from your subject or set your tripod up. Focus on your subject. If you can't focus on the subject, move your feet with the camera until you find the sweet spot. Moving the objects may be harder to do. Personally, for me, even on a tripod, I found it a little shaky, but that might have been because I had my tripod on carpet and I was in my house. So here was my setup. Very simple setup. I've got my macro lens on my camera, or not my macro lens, my telephoto. I got a desk lamp. I got some clamps, and my subject is actually the inside of an old watch. And we're going to be seeing that subject a lot tonight. So there was my product at ISO 200, 250 millimeters on my lens, 1/3 of a second at 5.6. And you can even see the dust on the watch, especially when you turn it to wind it. This is a very old watch that you wind up. So that was the first attempt with the telephoto. Now, I did buy some extension tubes. These are hollow tubes. They reduce the focus distance, thus increasing your magnification. You can use them with any lens. The set I bought actually allows me to do autofocus and f-stop adjustment. So I went for I think it was like $50 or $75 set. Some of them are cheaper and they do not allow for autofocus and f-stop. You do need to purchase those specifically for your camera type. Like I had to buy a Nikon set. They won't work on a camera, Canon camera. So here we are. We got our focus rings on with my telephoto lens. And if I had to do this all over again, somehow I would have put the lens on the tripod as exposed to the camera to give it more stability. Those are the rings right there. This is the first one is, this picture is a 300 millimeter with the smallest ring. It was an aperture priority. I had ISO set at 100 and it gave me 1/4 of a second. Okay, now the next series of pictures are all from the same setup with more, adding more focus rings. And these are full pictures. They're not cropped at all. So you can see how adding the focus rings or, you know, the stacking of the rings gives you more magnification. So this is one with the smallest ring. This is the one with the small and the medium ring. And this is well, all 3 rings. So you can get in really close. Camera didn't move, subject didn't move. All I did was add those different rings. So that is one way to get out there. For me, I found, like I said, I found them shaky, but that may be because I had my lens extended way out at 300 millimeters and I was on carpet with the tripod. So that potentially could be a little shakier. Macro lens. For me, I'm biased. I have a macro lens. It's the easiest way to go. They can be pricey. They're typically fixed focal length, but you can handhold them easily or you can use them on a tripod. If you find that you're very interested in exploring macro, start looking for refurbished or used lenses. Most of them are just as good as buying new. Bruce can tell us if my macro lenses are refurbed or not. There's a very well possibility that they might be. I slap my macro lens on and I take it out in the field for a walk. I'll hike with it sometime just to be doing something different. Okay, so here we are. Same setup in my activity room or my studio. Same watch head, same little curved lamp, same camera sitting on its little tripod. Here's the difference in 2 f-stops. Notice the depth of field matters. I've got f5 and f9, and you'll start noticing there's more things in focus on the right-hand picture than there is on the left-hand picture. Because again, look at your depth of field, 1/16 versus 1/8 of an inch. It really matters. Here's another example.
I think your dot is in the wrong place on the translation to millimeters.
It could be. It could be. I'd have to get my calculator out and do some math. I'll check it afterwards and correct the slides. I'm not good with the millimeter stuff. I can tell you that right now. So this one is another example between 1/16 and 1/2 an inch using f5, and then note on the right, f36. So we're talking 1/2 an inch of depth of field. The key point here, if you notice, is look at the background. Look at the background paper. On the f5, the background paper is still slightly blurry. f36, which I realize is really extreme. You're starting to see grain in that. You're actually getting in focus that background. So, lower depth of fields, but what if you want more things in focus, but you don't want the background in focus? That's where focus stacking comes in. This will help you overcome depth of field in your final image. To do this, you set your camera up, you set your tripod up, you focus on several different spots on the subject, And then you combine those images in software. So let's take a look at our watch again. F5.6, 1/20th of a second at 85 millimeters. Okay, you see some stuff's in focus, some stuff isn't in focus. Yeah, okay, fine. So then I did a series where all the X's are, essentially is where I focused and took an image. Repositioned my focus point, took another image. Did that for all of these different points. I did adjustments in Lightroom so that all of the same pictures, so 12 pictures, all had the same contrast, clarity, size, things like that. And then I focus stacked them in Photoshop. Single shot versus focus stacked. You can start seeing the detail in the watch starts coming out more, including the dust on the little thing that winds it. But the background isn't in focus. So that's a 12 image stacked focus stacked in Photoshop. 5 images focus stacked, 1 image at f36. Not a whole lot of difference in this one, I'll say. And part of that is because we don't see the background. We're not seeing that background because this is a very close in picture. Okay, I had not planned on taking us through Photoshop to show you this, but here are the simple steps. And remind you again, I am not a Photoshop guru. I look at this and I've got this written down and I go through it every time I have to. When I start doing this stuff, I got to remember how to do it. I select my images, the 12 images, 5 images that I want to focus stack. I post-process them in Lightroom. I ensure my crops are identical. I open in Photoshop as layers. And then I go through 3 steps in Photoshop from the menu bar. I'm sure there's shortcuts for all of this stuff, but I'm not a shortcut person. And then I experiment with blending modes as your skill set allows you. And then you can either save it as a PSD file or you can flatten the image and then save it. Remember, again, I'm not a Photoshop guru. I usually stick around in Photoshop until I'm happy with something, and then I flatten the image and take it back into Lightroom. But these are the simple steps that will allow you to try focus stacking in Photoshop. Now, I know there's a cadre of softwares out there that are specifically for focus stacking. And I don't know the names of them all, but I'm sure people in our group can put those in comments somewhere or in chat if you're interested in trying different ones. For what I do with my macro stuff, I'm perfectly happy with Photoshop right now. Now, I mentioned blending modes, and I wish we had an expert within the group that would spend a whole evening with us on blending modes, because I'm the hunt and peck kind of person. I get my little pictures in Photoshop, as you can see here. This is that 5 stack thing. And then if you focus down on the right, you're going to see something under the word layers that says vivid light, and it does stuff to it. And it's like, ooh, do you like that? You know, if I do, great. And then I play with percentages and things. This one is multiply. It does some multiplication of certain layers to bring in richer colors, what have you, that kind of thing. Experiment with them. That's what I do. And you always can get back to where you need to through the history panels and things. And then this is a weird looking one. This one is called exclusion. Exclusion. Another one of my favorites, which I don't have an example with us tonight, is difference. I've done a couple pictures with that and I absolutely love it with difference. So again, don't be afraid. Once you get comfortable with focus stacking, try some of this different blending modes and see what happens. Okay, I got one more example for you. 5 pictures with water droplets on, I think this is a carnation. Water droplets are in different spots. And if you look at the different pictures, you can see some of them have the water drops in focus, some don't. But then if you run it through Photoshop with focus stacking, Lightroom, do your stuff, get them all the same. There you go. You get more water droplets in focus. But the background still, those outside petals aren't in focus. So it's what you want. It's what your vision is. And in this case, I will show you how to place water droplets. All of these water droplets were hand placed. So I've collected a lot of things through my playing time with macro. I use knee pads or an old bathroom rug to get down low outside. I have a squirt bottle for water. I have a syringe for water droplet placement, a flat mirror, a piece of black plexiglass, which I ordered off of Amazon, clothespins sometimes outside to remove foliage, not to cut it, but just to get it out of the way, clamps, a flower frog, parchment paper, selections of pretty scrapbook paper for backgrounds, handheld flashlights, LED, flat light box. I just find stuff that I think, oh, this might be good to do something with. Now you can do macro photography inside or outside. Outside, you got weather problems. Wind is one of the biggest, rain, snow. But then it's kind of fun to go out when there's natural water droplets out on plants or the occasional snowstorm that we get. You can have natural light, or you can bring along a flashlight too to help in the daytime even too. Scout out what you want to shoot. Like I said before, sometimes I just slap that macro lens on my camera and I go for a hike. Where do you look? Your own backyard, your neighborhood, parks, wherever you're at outside. You don't sometimes have to go very far. I remember one day I put my macro lens on after a snowstorm here a few years back, and I don't even think I made it around the block. I was just so fascinated with the plants that I could take pictures of from the sidewalk. But if you want to play inside, weather isn't a factor. You've got natural light depending on your room, or you can use flashlights. You can collect things to shoot. Go buy a bouquet of flowers from Costco. Small objects found around your house. You can experiment with artistic and creative shots. Believe me, you can while away the hours and the days in a studio. Your kitchen could be considered your studio, or anywhere in your house. You can while away many, many an hour. The sky is the limit. So here's a picture of some of the things that I've collected. Clamps, that thing in the middle, that brown black thing, that's a flower frog. You put water in it and there's spikes in it, and you put your flowers in there. A roll of parchment paper makes an awesome background. Awesome background. And I did pick up some flowers, I think at Costco or maybe Lynn's Market. And I started playing one afternoon. So this is my setup. See the parchment paper over a box, just so that it gives a, an infinite edged background. Here's the back of what the camera looks like when I'm focusing in on. You notice I'm using live view. I mainly just show the picture, but you can also use live view in manual mode and things to help you focus in exactly where you want to be and not rely upon the camera to decide the focus. And then once I got done with that, that was my image. I was going for that little centerpiece and softness around the outside of it. Next thing was a rose. It's in my flower frog. I'm lighting it with my LED light from below. I'm placing water droplets with my syringe. Just fill it up and carefully drop water droplets on it. where you want them. And they usually stay pretty good. And you can see the light coming up through that petal. Here I took the rose out and I lit from above and I added some water droplets. I got that picture. Again, that's just parchment paper behind it. And then I decided to do a unique crop on this one. Okay. Another thing I read online was about this guy who would get reflections in water droplets of the plant or the flower behind it. So this is actually a fake flower. I bought it at Michael's so that it wouldn't die on me and I could always pull it out to use it. This was my first attempt at this game. So you can see I've got it in one of those little white boxes. I got my flower frog with a straw in it, a piece of wire, because that's what I'm going to put my water droplets on, and the plant behind it. This is what I ended up with for my picture. It took me quite a while to get this picture. You can see that I sprayed a lot of water droplets to get the drops to provide the reflection of the flower that's behind it. Now, if you go and notice here, that wire was going parallel to the floor of my studio, but here it isn't. What did I do? I flopped it around in Lightroom to get to the image that I thought was more pleasing than straight across. So then another time I bought a real flower. This is a real one. I'm using a piece of a goat's beard puffball thing. I should have had a picture of the full puffball. I spray the heck out of it with water in a squirt bottle to try and get as many tiny little droplets as I can with that flower behind it. Close up, you can see that in the clamps, light on the side, lighting the back flower. This was my first attempt. And you can see I'm getting reflections, and yet you can't see the flower in the back. So I took it one more step further, and this next picture took me a half a day to get. And that's a yellow flower in the background with that same pluck from that goat's beard flower head. It looks like a giant dandelion. You've all seen them around. And spray, just plain water. I didn't add anything to it to change the viscosity to make it hang better, just straight water. I think you can use some sort of a glycol if you want them to last longer, but then you got a mess to clean up afterwards. I wanted to get that picture and I'm really happy with this one. Oh, also this one is focal stacked. I took many pictures and stacked them because there was no way I was going to get that good depth of field and keep that flower in the background. So another example outside.
Shirley, I
Yes.
have one quick question on the last image. And the photo stacking compared to the prior image. So you had mentioned about, having the subject be parallel, or I'm going to think like almost like in a 2D plane, in directly in front of your lens. And this goat object you mentioned, is it pretty much in one plane parallel to your lens, or no, would you say it's actually slightly skewed there?
It's slightly skewed. In this image, I'm trying to remember with the red, I think I was using the top part of it to make my image. So I tried to get it as parallel as I could, but it was hard. It was really hard because then if you tried to manipulate it too much, then it would fall apart.
Thank you.
Yeah. Because you can see I've only, in this red one, I've only got like 3 strands of it. And those
And
are
there's
fairly
there's no
parallel.
stacking in this red image. This one is a single image.
I think it's a single image. This one is definitely a stack, but I can't remember how many. I'd have to look back. But this again it definitely was not parallel completely, not enough to do one shot. Good question, Gail. So this is a yard cactus in my front yard. Love this cactus. In doing this, this cactus is only probably about 1 foot tall. So I did have my macro lens on my tripod with my tripod splayed wide open. I had a rug on the ground so I could lay on the rocks comfortably. I shot many images. I planned for focus stacking. So I took several images, I think 10, if I remember correctly. And this is actually the 10 stacked images. This is of the, the combining of the 10. But if you look at this picture aesthetically, it's like, wow, yeah, the flower is really cool, but you got all the rock and stuff in the background. So I actually purchased and took a class from Matt Kay on how to make textures. He talked to us probably last year or maybe the beginning of this year, and showed us a little bit about how to add textures into your images. And I bought that class and I did it. And then I finished the picture this way. I got rid of all those rocks. Here's another one of the same cactus, only closer in. This is a one shot. This was like one of my first pictures. You could see all that pollen in there. I took another series of 10 images, photo stacked those in Photoshop, added a texture to the background, and created this picture.
Wow.
And I chose the background, the texture that I put in it was one that had a little bit of yellow to try to give it that feeling that it was bursting out into the texture. For me, Matt Kay's videos are the way I learn, and you need to find the person who you can follow and what he's doing. And his classes are pretty reasonably priced. And no, I get no kickbacks from Matt Kay.
I have one more question. I know you
Sure.
already said this on the photos that you take, say in this case, the 10 photos you take for stacking purposes. Are you only changing the f-stop in each of those images, or are you changing other things as well?
The only thing I'm changing is where my lens is focusing.
Okay, yep, you already said that. Sorry, thank you.
Yeah. Only where it's focused.
Shirley, just in that regards, I'm just wondering, just to touch your controls enough to change your point of focus, you don't find that moves your camera slightly? It's not enough to make any difference if it does.
Not if I have locked it down on my tripod and I do it very carefully.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very gentle with it. And then during focus stacking, it will align the images. So if you are a little bit off, it'll take care of that.
I was just thinking, I bet on some of our cameras, it just dawned on me after I said that, I just have never done it. I think on my camera, on my screen, I can actually change focus points just by carefully touching the screen, my screen itself.
I wouldn't doubt it. Yeah.
So, but you're right. When you put it through a photo stacking program, that would probably take care of any slight movement anyway.
Yeah, it would. Yeah. So then just to give you some examples of some creativity, if you want to call it that, I bought a new box of crayons one day, played with macro with that. And then I found this a plug-in that you could get for free for 30 days called Flood. You can add water to anything. So I added water to about 100 different pictures and was like, oh, that was fun. I'll probably never want to do that again. And I didn't buy it, but I just played with it just to have some fun. Stuff sitting around the house, a marble on a light box. This is a one shot. This one is not a focus stacked one, but you could focus stack something like this because again, with it being round, and I used a little bit of the museum putty to hold it in place because it kept rolling around. Another image off the light box, just 3 leaves I liked. Kind of wanted to see what it looked like with the light coming up through them to hopefully get some definition and detail in the veins. Dandelion, pieces of dandelion on black plexiglass. That black plexiglass was one of the fun things I ever bought off of Amazon. I call this one a COVID project. Right before we had the big shutdown a while back, I stopped at the florist and this was in the trash. This flower was in the trash. And I asked her if I could have it. And she said, yeah, sure, go ahead. Put it on my black plexiglass, did a whole bunch of focus stacks, whole bunch of images, combined them in Photoshop. This is one of my favorites I've ever made. Just the level of detail in the flower and also in the reflection. Sea glass. Pieces of sea glass I've collected through the years. I wished I had more colors, but I backlit these with that cheap light box. Again, another Amazon find. Seashell. I had this seashell. I took pictures of it. I didn't really, like, it did nothing for me. I mean, I got done taking the pictures and I'm like, well, it's a seashell, big deal. But then I was still learning that texturing class. I was taking that and I was like, oh, let's put some texture behind it. Again, it was lit from a light box, a cheap light box. And I just added the texture to it and then I liked it. I was okay with it after that. This is one. Go ahead.
Suggested title is
What's that?
Shirley Smith selling seashells by the seashore.
There you go. I should. Don't live near the seashore, but yeah, this is actually, I think, a Florida seashell. Now, this one I did years ago. Oil and water in a clear cake pan with a colorful silk scarf underneath it. Mixed up the oil, just fun reflections, something simple and creative to do. Again, it's something just to while away the time if you need to. So those are some examples. I hope it gave you some creative thoughts and ideas. I personally find macro and close-up photography can be fun. I can do it inside or out. You can start with the equipment you have. You can explore the software and the post-processing techniques. Like I said, I do a lot of post-processing sometimes by hunt and peck, or what does this do? Oh, I like that. Or what does this do? Oh, that looks really not what I wanted, and back out of it. You can get creative, you can have fun. And the best thing about digital photography is we can take lots of pictures, lots and lots of pictures. Now, if this has gotten you to where you want a little mentoring or some time one-on-one or a couple people together, send me a note and I'd be more than happy to get together with you someplace, maybe bring some of the, the plexiglasses and different things like that, and we can try and have some fun. So let me know if you want to do that. You can send me an email. I think most of you know how to get a hold of me on the Red Dog email. If not, you can also send me an email at shirley@11,000lakesphotography.com. And that's it. That's what I have for today. Hopefully it gave you some creative ideas. Hopefully it'll give you some ideas of things to try, or if you've never tried close up or macro, some ways to do it and some ideas on how to do it. And
Shirley, I have a question.
sure,
What type of clamps do you use? And have you purchased all your things on Amazon, or what type of clamps do you use? And what type of, I noticed you had a couple of different LED lights that one was a table stand light and one was a clamp. Tell me what
Yeah.
your favorite LED lights are and what your favorite clamps are.
well, my favorite light is this tiny one that I have over my desk that I move, and it's one of the OT lights. OTTLITE.
Wait, say that again.
It's just I mean, it has bottom colors, but it's just a very simple desk lamp that's LED, and it's OTTLITE. They're supposed to be natural lighting. They used to be super expensive, these things were, but now they're not.
And so where did you get that? Do you remember?
Probably, I think may have moved with me, so maybe Target.
Oh,
Target.
and what about
Walmart.
what about that other light you used, which was kind of interesting, that
Folding one.
the folding one? What?
I think I picked that up. Oh, okay, I'm going to admit it. I do a lot of Zulily shopping, ZULILLY.
Uh-huh.
It's a consolidator place, and they happen to have it one time.
Okay. And what about
Clamps.
clamps?
Clamps. I've got my science background comes back in. I've got little just clampy ones it's a bar across and then two clamps. Those are absolutely perfect to do those water reflections on the flowers because they're the right length, but they're just little alligator clamps.
So did you make the whole little thing?
No, I bought it somewhere.
You can buy the whole little thing.
Yeah, I think
those-
Amazon.
Where
Those are,
would you?
ca- those are called helping hands. It is usually a tool for electronics work.
Yes,
And so
exactly.
where would you buy that?
I'd say Amazon. I think mine came from Amazon.
Amazon?
Radio
Yeah.
Shack.
I don't know, do they even exist? Radio Shacks?
I don't think they do.
Yeah, I
I
think I
think
got
Harbor
mine.
Freight has them.
Harbor Freight. If you want to do it
Harbor
locally.
Freight.
And then I do also have some other rubbery things that I take out in nature with me that I think they're called clamps or
Oh, yeah, I
PLA.
was gonna say, I know that clamps are really popular too, and
Yeah. Yeah, I think I've got some other rubbery things that, you can pull. And honestly, sometimes I just use a clothespin.
yeah, that's good to know.
Just use a clothes, especially if you want to you're trying to get something out of the way.
Mhm.
And I take a clothespin with me. They're cheap
Yeah.
and light, and you get 100 of them at the dollar store for $1.
Yeah.
Shirley, question about focus stacking. What does it do to noise?
I have no idea.
For instance, if you have a uniform background that could hypothetically look a little bit grainy if you go pixel peeping,
Mhm.
and you focus stack a few images, do you have any idea what that background is going to look like? As in, it's going to look like it's breathing. Sometimes it's more grainy than other times, or it's zoned depending on what the software decides to keep with regard to focus.
I have no idea. Anybody in the group that's done any focus stacking? Can anybody help us out with that? Sorry.
Yeah, well,
Generally, focus stacking is going to try to, I'm sorry, my clock chose just now to start chiming. That. Okay, it should be about done.
It's a lovely sound.
It's a 7
Oh.
o'clock.
It's irritating. Generally, focus stacking, it automatically chooses whatever has the most detail for each frame. So it's going to view grain as detail. So it really won't have any effect on grain other than it will bring out the sharp grain in every frame. If that makes sense.
So it would make it maybe slightly more grainy?
probably would have no effect because the grain is probably going to be uniform in every in focus image. So you'll have, it will have the same grain that was there, but the grain is kind of in focus along with the subject.
And I haven't ever really taken, I usually, when I'm doing tripod work for focus stacking, my ISOs are pretty low. So I don't necessarily have a lot of inherent grain in noise in the images I'm using to do focus stacking. Does that help?
I hear you. Yeah, it was like when I've never used focus stacking, and well, now I know that it's another trick in the tool bag.
Yeah, and I do know people who, I don't know, has anybody here ever tried it on landscapes? I've heard of people doing that with landscapes too. I've not ever done that. I haven't never seen a need to do that, but then, you know, maybe that's why my landscapes look the way they do, as opposed to somebody who does it. I don't know. I do, you know, it's probably just within the last couple of years, I've done the focus stacking on the macro stuff, so.
Just a couple other comments.
Sure.
First of all, I guess for myself, I tend to approach things in kind of a binary fashion. So in terms of depth of field, I tend to start by thinking, do I want everything in focus or almost nothing in focus? And so I tend to use either the largest aperture and the least depth of field, or a small aperture and focus stack, and very little in between. Because generally, I either want a very shallow depth of field or a very deep depth of field. And it's rare that I want something in the middle.
You know, I would agree with that. When you say that, and I think about my images that I've produced, and when I approach an image, yeah, you're correct. I don't usually use like F8 or F10 or anything like that in the middle.
And something else, I don't know if you mentioned this or not, but macro lenses are just good lenses in general. They will focus at infinity. So if you put on a 105 millimeter macro lens and go for a hike, you have a 105 millimeter lens that you can take pictures all day. It will just also do close-ups.
Correct. And I did not mention that. That's a very good point.
Isn't there also something to do with magnification on the macro lenses? A long time ago, I took a 105 millimeter macro lens, set it up on a tripod, and took a picture of a flower or something a foot or two away. Then without moving the camera, I swapped lenses and put on my 18 to 200 or something and zoomed it up to 105 and took the same photo. And the macro lens was like it was zoomed into 200 from the resulting photo compared to the.
It may have been because when you're using a prime lens in particular, the closer you focus, you're extending the focal length. That's how you get it to focus closer. So the 105 millimeters is its focal length when it's set at infinity.
Okay.
So
I think I even zoomed it into 200 on the other one. It was about the same size as the 105. But then I took the same experiment and shot a tree 100 feet away, and they turned out exactly the same. So,
yeah, when you focus close, you're extending the focal length. And
so is that a function of the macro lens or just a prime lens?
It's just a function of lenses in general. And if you watch movies, occasionally you'll see a focus pull where they shift focus from a character in the foreground to a character in the background. And in cinema, you want a lens that doesn't breathe, and that is, it doesn't change focal length as you change focus. Right. So they spend lots and lots and lots of money to get a very high-end cinema lens that when you change focus, it maintains the same focal length so that it doesn't appear to zoom in and out as you pull focus. And that's called breathing in the cinema world.
Okay.
Okay, that's really all way beyond me, but that was interesting.
Yeah. The other thing I've noticed is the specs for lenses, at least all the Nikon lenses I've looked up, all have a spec called minimum focus distance. which, you know, if it's 2 feet and you can't focus anything closer than 2 feet.
Mhm.
And I usually, when I buy a lens, I check that out. A lot of the long telephoto lenses, especially the expensive ones, seem to have like a minimum focus distance of like 5 or 6 feet, which does not make it good for macro.
Well, it can, you just stand further away from your subject and you focus all the way in.
Yeah, but you're so far away, you're not really getting,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. But the one I used, that whatever, the 300 was pretty good. I mean, I was pretty doggone close to the stuff.
Yeah, some are good and some aren't. That's
Yeah,
why I
good
kind of
point.
look at that spec when I'm looking at lenses.
Good point.
Shirley, if I could just throw in a couple of suggestions for people who are looking for something interesting and fun to use with macro. I've got one of the things in my backyard. I've got an old railway tie retaining wall, and I just went out and set up a camera right next to the retaining wall with in bright sunshine, and laid down a strip of honey,
Oh,
and then watched to see who showed up. And the insects were amazing. I got some really neat pictures of ants, ladybugs, spiders, you name it. And that's where the fun part kicked in. The other thing that I did, I've got some of this retaining wall. It's in the right time of the year. We get a moss that develops on top of the log. So I lied down on the gravel at the same height as the moss, but with nothing behind it, and just started shooting macro at the top points on this moss. And by the time you get it onto your computer and zoom in, it looks like you're in the middle of a box of alfalfa sprouts.
mm-hmm.
But that just I think what I'm trying to illustrate is just go on the wild side and just experiment, see what happens.
Yeah. Around here, the lichen is really cool to shoot with macro, the different lichens.
Oh yeah.
And then there's something, I don't know what the scientific name is of it, but something called resurrection moss, that when it's dry, it's all kind of gray and greenish, kind of looks like it's dead. But if you water it, it comes up and alive and green. And it's kind of neat to see that. It might be a cool time lapse too, if somebody was interested in trying to do a time lapse. But yeah, that's the kind of the thing with the macro lens, is you don't have to go far and wide to find some very interesting images.
Yeah.
And there's a ton. I mean, I belong to at least 2 or 3 different Facebook groups that are focused just on macro photography. And I'm amazed what some people take pictures of. Amazed.
Yeah, you mentioned the macro lenses are expensive. I've noticed with Nikon anyway that they have a selection, but you can start out, I think the shortest one is a 40 millimeter. You can get one of those for like a couple $100.
Oh,
And then it
okay.
goes up to 60 millimeters for a little more. And then, you go all the way up to 105 and you're talking $1,000. But it seems like the longer the focal length, the more expensive they get. But you can start out with a, shorter one. The advantage of the long ones is you don't have to get quite as close to a bug, so you don't scare it away as easy. But
Yeah. And like with any photography, you need to practice the, leave no trace if you're out in the wilderness, and don't bother the bugs, and don't harass the bugs, and don't put them in a refrigerator to slow them down or anything like that. There was a huge discussion on one of my macro groups about that one time. And I'm like, I was appalled that people even thought about doing that. But anyways, just, practice nice things. And Bruce, what about the refurb side of it? Do you think that a refurb macro lens from a reputable place would be a possibility?
I've always been a fan of factory refurbished equipment. I buy everything factory refurbished if I can. I'm leery of other companies refurbishing. So if I buy a Nikon lens, I want a Nikon refurbished. Because a lot of times a store, you know, some reseller will do a refurbished lens, but that means they just dust it off and sell it. So, but with Nikon, even the cameras, they come through looking brand new. You know, they replace everything that has any wear at all in it. And they go through the whole thing. So you're basically getting brand new for, you know, a discounted price.
That's the word. I couldn't remember factory refurbished. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely factory
You
refurbished.
know, Nikon themselves have a section on their website of all their refurbished gear that they have, and some other reputable dealers like Adorama and B&H, you know, it'll say in there if it's factory refurbished or some other refurbished. So I always just stick with factory refurbished, and I've never had a problem. I've done that with everything, you know, even computers and stuff. So it's,
Okay,
Hey, Shirley, I have a question. That
Sure.
images that you had where you had a lot of the little water droplets on the dandelion kind of
Mhm.
device or deal. And you said you photo stacked that. I love that image. I've seen it before and I absolutely love it. My question is since you had to photo stack it, but you had all these little water droplets, did you have any challenge with many of those moving between images that you had to go in and maybe remove some of them or play around with it, or how?
The lifetime of the water droplets on the plant itself is very short. So if, when I did it, I would, you know, squirt, 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 squirt more and more, because you never seem to have enough. And you had to kind of keep, you get a rhythm with it. And then as soon as you think you've got what you want, you get in there and you take your photos. You
Okay.
don't slow down, because by the time you get a minute or two into it, all of a sudden it starts drooping.
Okay.
Because I've tried
No.
to go back and like, oh, I'll use the same piece. And I was
Right.
like, "Ooh, it just
Too much movement.
too much
No,
movement,
when-
too much weight of water.
You know, it's funny when I saw that image, I think it's Supercuts or one of the local hairstyling places, Great Clips. They have these little misting bottles where it takes the water and it doesn't just spray it like you're spraying Clorox everywhere or Windex,
Mhm.
but it turns it into a mist. And I'm wondering if one of those might be a nice tool to have.
It would be, but actually what mine are empty Kirkland brand
Oh, yeah. Okay.
eyeglass cleaners. If you go and you buy the little eyeglass cleaners from Kirkland, from Costco,
Yeah.
you can always take it back when it's empty and have it replaced. And then if you get an empty bottle, that's what I use for my sprays.
Oh,
And
perfect.
that gives it a nice mist. So it's
Yeah.
probably very similar to the same mist.
Yeah. Yeah.
As
Yeah. 'Cause
opposed to the squirt bottle.
yeah, you get all the big
that you
droplets.
get the big drops. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Cool. All right. Thanks.
You
And thanks
bet.
again for tonight.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
it's-
I was
Thank
gonna
you for
say
attending.
Great stuff.
on the droplets,
Yes.
I know Shirley, you're right about using stuff other than water, then you've got a mess to clean up. But if you do have a ton, if you really want a lot of droplets like you're talking about on that photo you're talking about, that might be a time to actually use a mixture of glycerin and water, because the droplets will, they're thicker and they will stay quite a bit longer than just the
Okay.
water.
I have a bottle of glycerin and I have done some stuff with that early on, but I just found it messy
It
and
is.
then I got it on the lens and then it was messier. And so if anybody wants glycerin to practice with or try, hit me up, because I seriously have
You
like
have a bottle?
bottle. It was the smallest I could buy online.
And I'm trying to think, what other uses would you have for glycerin? I'm just wondering, what do you use glycerin for?
I don't use it for
in the home?
anything. Yeah, it's sitting on my shelf, but I won't throw it out, because the minute I do, I'll find I want to try.
I'm sure it's got to be used for something. I just come to
It
think
is
about it, I don't know
good.
what to
Well,
use it for.
Back to the bubble thing, it is good if you are trying to make big bubbles too.
Mm.
Like if you
Mhm.
do a bubble solution and stuff like that with the dish soap and things like that. If you want to try to get bigger ones that last longer, so you can actually do some photography on those, glycerin helps too. It's amazing what you can buy on Amazon. All right, I better stop this recording and end this night.